Hello, everyone. Namaste, and hope everyone's having a great weekend. Welcome to another episode of Narad News. Yeah, it's been a long week. I've been trying to get this one for a couple of days. I thought I would do it yesterday, then I said, okay, let's move it to today morning, and then I got late again. Yeah, just the start of the new year is always very busy. Yeah, you start getting tired really quickly since I do have a full-time job right now. So yeah, that takes up a lot of time, and I have to sort of prioritize that and make sure everything there is going as going as per plan before I can come and do these lives, because what I want to do is make sure that whenever I start talking, whenever I put out something, it's of some value to all of you. And it's also a topic that I'm interested in. It's also a topic that affects the lives of Canadians in general, because most of the events that happen these days, their news cycle is like 3 days, 2 days, and then there's something new that comes up. Everyone's attention is on that. I I by design try to sort of stay away from all the hot topics, because you can watch endless number of news channels, YouTube videos, YouTube channels. All of them talk about that event, talk about the hottest takes, and analyze them from different angles, provide very different types of opinions. And it's not just when you have these big global events happening, it's not just one political side that's commenting, right, on social media. All everyone's talking about it in some form or the other. And a lot of the times, depending on which side they are, either it's all doom and gloom, or it's all like a bed of roses, and times have never been better, right? I try to stay away from those. I look for issues that may be getting some attention, but they don't have such a huge spotlight that it's taking up a lot of news cycles. Because I think in those issues, in those topics that get covered, um, lies what affects us on a daily basis. The macro events that happen, they of course affect our lives in some form or the other, but their effect will be seen in some sort of policy that will trickle down. And that trickle down policy is where my interest lies, typically. I follow the big topics. It's not that I have anything against them. It's just that, yeah, then it'll start feeling like, okay, another cog in a big wheel. And then you kind of lose the originality that you're trying to bring to the space. Um, so, anyways, let's get started. I want to pull up what I had in store today. Okay, so as you all know, we did a big deep dive live on this channel. Actually, I would say in November or something, when the Canadian budget came out, and we actually read that budget page by page on this platform. One sec, guys. Yeah. Sorry about that. Just got a quick cough. But anyways, just going back to that live we did previously. We did that one when the budget came out, and at that time there was one thing very clear, that the new administration, the Carney administration, they are going to do something about the size of the federal government, right? They just have to bring it down. If anyone remembers, there was Jason Jack. He made some comments last year. He had called Canada's fiscal position unsustainable. Since then, it looks like he has detracted he has tried to retract his statement and says, okay, I didn't mean those comments, or I didn't mean those, I could have used better words there. But I just want to quickly show on this, in this article, you will see G7 debt to GDP. So Canada is like basically slightly higher than Germany. Japan is just gone, is just out of the world at about 200%. They have been trying to reduce, but yeah, it's not. It's still quite unhealthy. Then of course we have the I guess the UK, US, US is a little over 100% of their GDP in debt, and then you have the UK, which is sitting in between UK and US. You have France and Italy somewhere in there, right about, I guess Italy is, or France is lower than the US and Italy, but it's kind of it's in a similar range, 90, 100%. And then you have the lowest ones is actually Canada and Germany. And in that, Germany wins out. Germany is about 45, Canada is about 50. So when we look at this chart, what we see is that actually Canada is doing decently well when it comes to debt to GDP ratio among the G7, which are the biggest economies in the world. So we might be led to believe that Canadian federal government has room to spend, right? When you see this chart, you're like, oh, Canada is good. Now, what we need to understand is none of these other figures are healthy anyways, right? The primary agenda of the current US administration is to try and reduce their debt, which increases by $1 trillion US dollars every, roughly speaking, 70 odd days, right? You don't want your situation to get so bad before you start trying to fix the problem, because we all know what kind of issues the US is facing to try and just stop its spending. In fact, the administration that came out, that, President Trump's campaign, he ran it on saying, okay, I'm going to reduce spending, I'm going to reduce the national debt. In fact, in the big beautiful bill, they had to propose new spending. But not to say that this kind of an event is localized to US. When the budget came out in Canada, even the Carney administration, even the Liberal administration had to propose new spending. Now, there are some counters to this point as far as Canada is concerned, that since the amount of immigration was reduced, they're trying to pump more money to try and get just stimulate the economy further, because you just don't have as many people coming into the country. That claim by itself may be slightly incomplete, just because the overall reduction in the number of immigrants is fairly minimal to Canada. What has decreased is the biggest chunk of the immigrants that were, causing issues, which was international students. There's not enough housing, rents are just through the roof, no one can afford anything. So when you cut down that, but you still allow dependents to come in, dependents will always go and just stay with the people they're dependent on, right? So ultimately, you can curb housing issues just by reducing immigration on categories who will be looking for their own places to live. So I would say they have selectively identified the group that, and of course, to that, if we say international students should be lessened, of course, temporary resident visas should also be reduced. So I would say overall they identified the problem well, and then they went ahead and reduced that number. I'm not gonna comment on the other categories because I just don't know enough to have an informed opinion. But yeah, without digressing too much, I just wanted to point out this chart. Like, just because it looks good on this one doesn't mean you wait for the situation where this pink line gets up to 100 and then you're like, oops, we have a problem, right? As an extreme example, look at Japan over here. They have had a stagnated economy for like 25 odd years. And they've literally just gotten used to it. Like, it barely grows, it doesn't do much. And they're just still, they're so used to it. They've actually learned to just live with it, right? You just don't want to get in that situation. So, in connection with that, here is this global news article that came out on 19th, right? Thousands of federal government workers received layoff notices. Now, at the outset, I really do want to emphasize that anyone receiving a layoff notice, that's not a good thing. But again, we have seen this happen all over industry as well, in especially tech, right? You keep getting all this news that, okay, private Meta announces 10,000 layoffs, Google announces 10,000 layoffs, Microsoft announces 10,000 layoffs. I think the most recent one was Amazon, who had a bunch of layoffs just at the end of last year, right? So we are seeing a lot of that come out. And not all of it is just because AI is replacing jobs at the speed of light. It's just simple that you had so much hiring during the pandemic that you're just trying to go back down to sustainable levels. In fact, there's a good video. I don't know this person personally, but his channel is called Web Dev Made Easy. And he recently made a video on the tech industry, on how the number of job postings are actually at 2014 levels, which, and and at the time, and when we were in 2014, I was very much there. I graduated in 2014 from my undergrad. So, you know, at that time, the market was considered good, like good for jobs. It was considered a decent market. There were no issues that, oh my God, there is no jobs available, there's nothing available. No, it was considered a good time. People were getting work. It's just that in the pandemic, we saw such an unprecedented increase that now it feels like, oh my God, it's melted down. It is 68% of the highest we saw in the pandemic, but it's still not that bad a number. A similar thing happened in Canada with respect to federal hiring. For different reasons, it's happened over a lot of years, but simply there was overhiring. And now the government is learning lessons, not just from within, but also, externally, like US, the biggest neighbor of Canada, is going through its own churn as far as trying to reduce federal spending is concerned. Canada does not want to see itself in that space, and they're trying to take some preemptive action, I would say. So, from an economic perspective, this is very much, well, needed. It's a bitter pill to swallow. And of course, the people who do get affected, they will get some severance, and then they will eventually have to look for their own work. To that end, I would say that the Canadian Employment Insurance Program is is probably one of the more generous ones. I think you get 6 months right off the bat, and then you can apply for other types of insurance which can give you money for up to like a year. I would say that's quite that's quite uh, reasonable. Like, I've had friends who have had layoffs. I had a layoff during COVID myself. I took cert for 2 months. Um, I would say that, okay, everyone who starts looking for new work or starts something new with their lives, it takes about 6 to 8 months to find your feet, to start generating some income. It may not be it may not cover everything, and I get that, but of course it's employment insurance. It's not going to be able to cover everything, and then you do end up in a spot where okay, at, at some point you will have to take a very very hard look at your expenses, cut them down as much as possible. And I know that's unfortunate, but I would also say Canada, the federal government and the provincial governments in Canada, they have a decent social net. Now, what the nuances are, who gets what, how much, I'm not privy to all those details. One thing is I have not done enough research, and the second thing is I'm not trying to necessarily go into that in this session. So let's go into this article a bit. Thousands of workers across the federal public service have received notices that their jobs may be cut. Not all of them have been decisively cut. It's just they may be cut. Many of them landing in the last week. So last week, okay, so we can think of it as mid-Jan. The union said, so it looks like the Public Service Alliance of Canada said 1775 workforce adjustment notices were issued to its members last week. Union said 2,273 members have received the notices since the federal budget was released in November. So one way to interpret this is, okay, there's a huge set of promises that are made in all these national interest level documents, your budget, your campaign manifestos, etc. At least the government is staying true to those, right? They did say that we are gonna do some lawn mowing in that sense, and then they're doing that. So we can't fault them for not letting us know earlier. One, we can't also fault them for not delivering on the promises they have made. But of course, as I mentioned, there is a dark side to this. People are going to lose jobs. But I also then have said that, okay, and this is pretty well known, that Canada does have a decent social net to at least protect you for some time till you can find something else to put food on your plate. It's not perfect. I don't think there is one country in the world that something like this is going to be perfect, because you hand out too much money for free and what you end up is with 8% inflation. You can't necessarily encourage that. But I would also say that, okay, a lot of people enjoyed a lot of free money during the pandemic, and then I think about up to 1 year later. And it's the country, the economy has to pay the bill at some point. And the sooner you pay your bill, the lesser, the overall impact is lesser. You can at least absorb it. Otherwise, if you decide to pay the bill when you're sitting at 100 or 120 or somewhere in this space, then it's too late. It's too hard to clamp down to try and curb spending. This is on a side, on a tangent here, but when President Macron took office in France, he tried to raise the retirement age of federal workers, I think, from 62 to 64. And there were massive protests. Massive, absolutely massive. I'm not going to tell France how to run their country. They can decide that. But he simply wanted to raise the retirement age by 2 years, 2 bloody years. And since then, if you see, France has literally not had a stable government, right? Prime ministers churning out like bloody popcorn, right? So the human tendency is to be lazy, and that's just the reality of it. If you are gonna get money for free, you will take it. I don't think there's anything right or wrong about it. That's just how we are wired, right? And and in my opinion, a responsible state should limit that as much as is needed, right? You can't take it down to zero because you do need help. There are genuine cases where you need a helping hand to support you, to lift you up. But if that hand is there for way too long, you will never learn to walk by yourself. I'm not saying this is a cookie cut solution. It's a very thin line that you have to walk on. But yeah, just distributing money for free, you're gonna end up in a massive problem, right? So the Professional Institute of Public Service of Canada said 1849 of its members were served a workforce adjustment notice last week, and argues that public servants are being forced into a Hunger Games style fight for jobs. Now, I'm not sure what they are being forced into. Like when you work in the private sector, you always, well, you have a performance review at the minimum every year. When you join a company, maybe 3 months, 6 months, as is industry standard or as that company decides. And then you put up your case for promotions, you try to get promoted, someone else may get promoted, you may be passed over, even though everyone who doesn't get promoted feels that the people getting promoted are all idiots, and that's not the case, right? Like they got promoted because they did something well, and maybe you just didn't do something as well, right? Now, to the extent that maybe some of the employees are being asked on what value add they're providing to their organization, I think that's fair. I haven't heard an announcement of any games that are being organized by the federal government to decide which employees to keep. If something does show up in any of your inboxes, please do comment in the please do leave a comment. And on that note, I will get a little shameless and request you to like, share, and subscribe if you like what you're seeing here. So, the union which held a rally to denounce the cuts last week said in a news release that it's demanding the government explain why experienced public servants are facing waves of workforce reductions as outsourcing spending reaches record highs. Now here is my hypothesis. You have a team of 50 people, you maybe only need 30 of them. So 20 of them have to go, right? Hypothetically. But since this team is huge in its current state, 50 people, it is possible that as a team of 50, they need more external help to be able to run themselves, right? That's why you call in outside, consultants, right? But as a team of 30, you may not need as much external help. It's just a case, right? Smaller team can be run more efficiently with fewer leadership positions, with fewer systems to distribute work, track progress, etc. It's possible, right? You can use less sophisticated systems to run smaller teams than larger teams. So it is possible that the mix up that's happening here is that the workforce reduction notices have started going out since about November of last year. The data that they're highlighting, outsourcing spending, has reached record highs, is actually for the majority of 2025, during which no notices were served, right? So it was maybe spent on projects that were needed to run much larger teams where the team size itself may not be justified, right? So let's look here. O'Reilly said the cuts announced are part of the government's comprehensive expenditure review and more job losses are expected in the weeks ahead. I will point that out in the budget. I have a small section highlighted. I'll share that real soon. Ottawa is looking to cut program spending and administration costs by about 60 billion over the next 5 years through its comprehensive expenditure review. This is coming straight from the budget. This is not news in that sense. Latest federal budget said the exercise will involve restructuring operations and consolidating internal services. So this is like saying, okay, merger and acquisition. You have a company acquiring another one. There will be cuts on the company that's being acquired. Again, I'm not trying to debate whether this is right or wrong. All I'm saying is that's just how an economic system will work if it needs to be efficient at what it does. I'm not saying you should only cut employees from a company being acquired, or you should only lay off employees from the company acquiring, or in this case, the department, however that merged relationship is working. I'm just saying that's how it happens. Otherwise, if you don't reduce, if you don't capitalize on synergies, you're just not going to have an efficient functioning system. And that's the reality of it, right? It said it also will deploy workforce adjustments and attrition to return the size of the public service to a more sustainable level. Again, you don't want to wake up when your debt to GDP ratio reaches 100, 120, 200. You don't have that. You cannot, no matter how rich you are, no matter how big a part of the G7 you are or not, it is better to wake up early than later. Canadian Association of Professional Employees said more than 2,800 of its members have received workforce adjustment notices since the budget was released in November. Again, lots of numbers. 1,900 of those members work at StatScan. Yeah, I'm not going to comment on why StatCan becomes a place to lay off. That is the government's assessment. But hey, it has to be metrics driven, right? Okay, what did you do last year? Not enough. Okay, maybe we need to reduce. Now, as soon as we see numbers that are going awry, we will always use an argument saying, oh, but there's humans behind it. Yes, there's a human behind every number ever produced. But again, if a system has to function efficiently, if the government has to function efficiently, it has to keep its expenditures low so that it can invest in projects that will yield greater value over time. For example, schools, infrastructure, even streamlined healthcare in Canada, right? Like I've done a whole deep dive live on the healthcare system in Canada right after the horrifying incident in Edmonton happened. I decided to go over and look at some numbers. There is so much money being poured into the healthcare system. We're just not getting anywhere close to an acceptable ROI as a Canadian citizen. We pay through taxes, we have our private insurance, they just endless. Anyways, the cost of living is through the roof, especially if you live in one of the bigger Canadian cities, your Torontos, Vancouvers, it's anyways very expensive. And then on top of that, when you start adding up taxes, and it's crazy, right? You go to a walk-in clinic and they're not taking walk-in patients, you're gonna feel pissed, right? So for something to, again, I'll just bring it back, like for something to be running efficiently, it has to have the fewest number of people possible to produce an acceptable quality, even a high quality of the work it's assigned to do. The government plans to cut the number of public service jobs by about 40,000, from a peak of 368,000 in 2023 to 2024. Now, 368,000, again, I like my numbers, so I'm going to do a quick calculation. Give me one sec, guys. And then population of Canada, I'll just take a rough number, 2023, 2024, so we were probably at 40 million. About 1% of the whole country, not just the working population, not just the, your 18 to 65, 1% of the entire country was being employed by the federal government. That is alarming. Think about it. If you assume about 60% of Canada is in the working age, right? 18 to 65. Now, if I had to, okay, 368 divided by, and I'll just do another, back of the envelope. So roughly speaking, about 1.5% of Canadian working class was being employed by the federal government. That's a lot of people. That's all I can say. And there's definitely room for improvement in terms of how much money is allocated, in terms of how many people it's being allocated to, in terms of the services they provide. Because every person you hire, you have to pay them a salary, you have to give them benefits. There's a whole slew of legislation that applies to you in order to keep an employee. So, if you are replacing someone who is already redundant, you have now a block of money to actually then put into tooling or any sort of infrastructure that might be needed to be able to provide the service better. Maybe build another hospital, since Canada has entirely a socialized healthcare system. I hope we forgo that soon, but I don't see that happening anytime that quickly. So maybe build another hospital, maybe build a ton of hospitals from all the salary that you're going to save. And then, try to fill them with doctors, not administrative staff. So the plan will see a reduction of 1,000 executive positions over the next 2 years and a 20% cut to spending on management and consulting services over 3 years. So it's not that the government is not addressing the external spending piece. They are saying that, okay, it's been at record highs, it needs to come down. Again, I'm seeing a multifaceted approach. It's not just, okay, we're going to lay off workers. We are going to look at all aspects of spending, and we are going to come up with ways to reduce each of them, right? So then when the union claims that we are hearing directly from members that consultants are still working alongside employees who received layoff notices this week, that raises serious questions. All that is being looked at. It's going to be done one by one. It doesn't happen in one day. Right? These are just nitpicking, statistics, or nitpicking some events to try and make a case. Obviously, none of this will hold any water. So I hope not anyway. The federal government has sent letters with information on its planned early retirement program to 68,000 public servants who may be eligible. So this is early retirement. This is not even a direct layoff. So you will get pension. Federal government workers get pensions. Early retirement, it sometimes is seen as, okay, you just got tired too early. You wanted to hang up the hat. But I mean, again, if The other way to look at it, maybe some of the people who are getting served these notices may want to look at it this way, that they now just have more time to be able to, do something else with their lives. It'll take time. Nothing gets built overnight. But again, you give it a year, you give it 2 years, you will have maybe a successful side business running. Maybe you start your own consulting services company. A small two people. You just start taking consulting contracts. You can start your own YouTube channel. In fact, in India, a lot of the veterans who have now graciously retired from the armed forces, they show up on a bunch of YouTube channels. I don't know how much they get paid or how they get paid, how the YouTubers pay them. I have no idea. All I'm saying is they have definitely been able to find something relevant to do with their time. I'm not saying they're not doing other things. I only see them on YouTube, so that's what I can talk about. But there are definitely ways to keep life interesting, even if you're quote unquote retired. Retirement is only from your job. It's not your entire state of mind, unless you choose for it to become that way, right? So one sec, guys. I'm not sure. Okay. Since there are also few details about the planned early retirement incentive, okay. Seems to be a lack of transparency as to which departments and which services will be impacted by job cuts. I mean, yes, Ms. D'Souza, because yeah, you don't get to know. I mean, yeah. when there's a layoff coming, no one is shouting from the top of their roofs that, oh, we will lay off XYZ teams. No. There's always a notice on, okay, the whole organization is going to lay off, but yeah, the teams, the departments, they are only revealed as they happen. It's never known. It's never known in advance, and this is a very common practice in the private sector. So I don't know why it should be any different in the public sector, especially because public sector tends to get more benefits at the end of the day from the private sector all over the world. I'm not sure if, well, I'm pretty sure that's the case in Canada as well, right? It's impacted our members, their mental health. They don't know if they're going to be next. Yeah, that's, well, okay. That's always the case during a layoff. Like I've had layoffs myself. So there is, I'm not saying it's not stressful. I'm just saying it's not any statistically different from what happens elsewhere. SATS Canada has already said it'll cut about 850 of its staff along with 12% of its executive team. Okay. Several departments, including immigration, so this is IRCC, is going to get affected. It looks like environment and climate change and employment and social development told their staff late last year information on job cuts would be shared this month. So it looks like we do have some idea on which departments the government is trying to cut down on a little bit. IRCC being one of them, because I guess fewer student visas, fewer TRVs to process, you literally need fewer people to be able to process the other set of applications that are coming in. I know the refugees, the amount of refugees Canada is taking in, I'm hoping it's reducing, or I'm hoping that there is something in the plan to reduce them a bit. And I also think that there could just be an efficiency thing, that even though, because in 2025, the net number of immigrants to Canada has not significantly reduced. What has reduced is international students and TRVs, temporary resident visas, right? So overall, there could just be an efficiency issue. They might just be rolling out systems to automate a lot of processes where you just need fewer people to do the same amount of work or to do a similar amount of work. It's also possible, since your visitor visas, since a lot of other categories of visas are not as heavily scrutinized as maybe student visas or work permits, that they are just quicker to send through the system and approve or not approve to get to a final decision. So guys, just to wrap up, what I will do is, let me quickly show you that one last piece uh, for today. Let me just get to that. Screen share, properties. Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. I don't have that opened up. Great. Yep. There we go. Open this up. Let me quick array. This is such a painful thing every time I need to. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, I'll move this here. So this is just a screenshot from the budget document itself. And again, if you want to see a whole deeper analysis on what this year's budget was going to be all about, please do go check out that live. It's in the deep dives playlist. Yeah, here is what the budget said. Budget 2025 delivers on the comprehensive expenditure review, reducing inefficiency and focusing on core priorities. 60 billion in savings over 5 years. That's the bold claim. The Global News article also mentioned that. The comprehensive expenditure review will rein in government spending, saving Canada 13 billion annually by 2028-2029 for a total with other savings and revenues of 60 billion over 5 years, right? So it looks like this is one of the first set of actions that is happening towards that. Savings would be achieved by restructuring operations, consolidating internal services, and right-sizing programs to realize efficiencies. So that Global Mail article literally looks like a reword of this section of the budget. Like the government is literally doing almost verbatim on what they promised. It will also involve workforce adjustment and attrition to return the size of the public service to a more sustainable level. Yeah, we saw this piece already highlighted in the article. A leaner public service is a more empowered and productive public service. That's almost always true, not just for public services. The leaner an organization, the more it can get done with lesser. The more efficient and more productive it will be for the people it's trying to serve. In public service, profitability is not necessarily a metric, but at the end of the day, if you're spending a bunch of money and the people are not getting the services they expect, then there is something wrong. For example, again, I think we have harped on this a lot: healthcare. We will also take action to close tax loopholes and make sure everyone is paying their fair share. Okay, cool. I want to see what comes down the pipeline with respect to that statement. It's kind of just snuck in there. If you don't read every sentence of the budget closely, you may actually miss it. But yeah, I also want to keep an eye on, okay, what tax loopholes is the government even trying to target? Are we moving more towards a digital currency, or are we getting rid of exemptions, or are we tightening up the definitions on exemptions? So lots more to come this year as far as, reducing the size of the federal budget is concerned. So yep, guys, stay tuned. And yeah, I will see you soon. Tomorrow I'll be doing, again, a collaboration on our Spicy Spectrum podcast channel with my friend JD. So yeah, see you all there. That will also be streamed live to Narad News or Spicy Spec Pod channel, so you guys can watch anywhere you want. And of course, please do follow our Instagram pages. Both channels have one. We post all our video links over there as well, so that you can quickly just click and then get to YouTube. You don't necessarily have to waste your time searching on the YouTube search page as well. All right, guys, have a great rest of the weekend. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.